Hello, good morning, and welcome to Cloud First Summit 2021. I'm Mark Stephen. I'm going to be chairing today's virtual event, which is organised by Digit. As you probably know, over the last year, due to things like COVID-19 and lockdown restrictions, and there was a sudden urgent need for a lot of people to work from home, the take-up of cloud has gone through the roof. It's estimated that sales have gone up by something like 40%. So this is a hot topic. We have some excellent speakers lined up for you today to discuss the various issues surrounding the use of cloud and the implementation of cloud and things. Now, we've transferred as much of the value as we can from a physical event into this virtual one. We've got presentations, we've got discussions, we've got networking via live chat facilities. We've got a great range of solution providers from across the supply chain in the exhibition area, and we can't really do these things without the sponsorship. So if you can, take the time to visit the exhibition area, have a chat to them, see how they might actually be of use to you. It just makes it worth their while, to be absolutely honest. There are a number of competitions and prizes on offer in the exhibition hall with a leaderboard to reward participation and indeed entry. Just click on the leaderboard icon at the top of the screen to find out more. Some exhibitors, cunning swines that they are giving away prizes at their booths, including over 800 quid's worth of Amazon vouchers. There's a selection of wine, a 21-year-old Glynn whiskey, a Sonos Roam speaker, a free vulnerability scan, Microsoft Surface headphones, a free cloud readiness assessment. That's worth $5,000 in itself, a Lenovo laptop, an Echo Smart speaker, and a Lego Technic 4x4 off-roader. From past experience, the really desirable thing in that entire list will be the Lego Technic 4x4 off-roader. Go figure. Please do explore the platform, engage with the sponsors, and just take the time to chat with your peers throughout the day. You never know what might come out of it. We've introduced a video chat function allowing you to have real-time, face-to-face conversations. Just click on the chat icon to begin. There are also 2 themed group chats in the networking lounge you can join, as well as a general networking chat room. And the conference sessions themselves are going to be run through a series of webinars. To access the sessions, just navigate to the auditorium page, click the session you wish to attend, or select the hyperlink in the pop-up boxes, which appear immediately before the main sessions. And last but not least, if you're going to tweet at any stage, please use the hashtag CloudFirstSummit. It just allows other people to follow the conversation. This first section of the day, we aim to contextualize the continuing shift to the cloud and just try and explore the considerations and challenges that organizations are facing. Our first speaker, Kylie Fowler, is Principal Consultant at ITAM Intelligence, who's going to be talking about something that I think has affected a lot of people, what's known as Cloud-sprawl. So, Kylie, thank you.
Hey, and welcome to the conference. It's amazing honour to be asked to be the first speaker. So thanks so much to Ray and Pete and the team at Digit. I really appreciate your trust in me, to be honest. So my name is Kylie Fowler, and as Mark said, I'm the principal consultant for ITAM Intelligence, and we're talking about Cloud-sprawl today, but just first of all, photo of me. What I do is I help clients understand how to manage their IT assets. So we sort of think about what an operating model might look like, how they can improve overall management of assets. My focus has traditionally been on software, but cloud is something that is so important for so many of my clients that it's something that really needs to be thought about and addressed. So we've had, you're never going to hear the end of it, we've had an extraordinary 18 months, and we've been forced to be really agile. We've been forced to just do whatever it takes to get ourselves up and running, keep our businesses operating, and in many cases, in fact, thriving, depending on the industry you're in. But as a result, we are seeing, of course, that costs are rising, and this is leading to potentially difficult conversations with finance teams and CFOs. But I think one thing that is interesting, and again, we've seen it in so many different ways, the pandemic has just accelerated existing trends. These difficult conversations, if you weren't already having them already, you would probably have been having them fairly soon anyway, pandemic notwithstanding. So I think there's no reason to duck them or blame the pandemic. We need to get on and really understand how we can get a grip on what is happening with our cloud, and particularly with the costs associated with cloud. So when I work with clients, I go through an exercise with them, which can be really eye-opening, where they think about the traditional, I call it the IT trade-off triangle. You know, in IT, we want to be agile and flexible and provide fantastic service to the business and to our customers. But we also need to be very aware of our risks and manage them quite closely, because they can be they can be existential threats. And then, of course, the other existential threat is managing our costs. If we run out of budget, we potentially, worst case scenario, could go out of business. If we're a government organisation, then, you know, services to people, to our citizens suffer. When I work with organisations, I say to them, look, where would you put the star? Is it somewhere on, are you making a trade-off between risk management and agility, and then the compromise is that your costs are rising? Or are you making a trade-off between risk management and cost control, and actually that means that you've got you're not as flexible as potentially you would like, or your services to your end customers, to you know, end users and the customers are maybe not as flexible and agile or as good as you would like? Cloud promised that it would take away this trade-off triangle, but I think what's happened in reality is that we've edged towards that risk management and agility edge of the triangle, and cloud has really allowed us to move much more into the agility apex, and cost control in many ways has started to slip. So I don't think cloud has really changed the dynamic as much as was promised, and we still need to try and understand how we can do the best we possibly can to grasp all three of these benefits. Traditionally, IT has really strongly controlled its CapEx spend, so it's capital spending. We've had projects that have very strict, that have budgets, they're carefully planned for, they go through lots and lots of approval hoops. But at the end of that project, there's usually an operating cost, which then gets tucked back into the IT budget. And the problem is that the IT budget, which is all the OPEX spend, has traditionally, again, historically been it's just been a black box. So the people who are paying the bills, the business, really don't understand what they're paying for or what they're getting. And there's no direct line between services and costs to allow the business to really understand their return on investment when they're pumping money into this voracious technology department that is just consuming, and sometimes it feels like they're getting very little in return, which of course we know is not true, but actually that is the feeling. So the shift to cloud services is shifting costs from CapEx to OPEX in many ways. But at the same time, I think what's interesting is it's making it easier to unpack that black box and to start implementing a much more direct relationship between benefits and value and the costs, what it's costing us to provide those services. And that gives the business a much more accountability and enables them to start making more decisions that have traditionally been forced onto IT. And the reason I say it's easier is because if we think back to a data center world where we've got lots and lots, hundreds of virtual machines potentially whizzing around, a smaller number of really big, huge physical boxes, plus those physical boxes will be licensed in some way. So there's licensing cost, not sometimes associated directly with VMs, but more normally you might have, a VMware licensing costs or Windows Server costs that are spread across those physical machines. And that arrangement just makes it really difficult to say to a particular business, look, this service and these VMs that use that or that rely on that service are costing you X. Whereas in the cloud, we're doing away with the physical infrastructure. To a certain extent, we're doing away with the licensing, and certainly the licensing has a much more one-to-one relationship anyway. So it becomes much easier to say, right, these VMs are yours and this is what they are costing. So although the black box is getting bigger, if we're clever about it, it's not easy, it's very complicated, but it's actually easier to unpack than when we had efficient hardware use and efficient licensing use in the data centers. So how do we tame the cloud? And I think the key to this is governance. So before I actually get down to practicalities, and I'm a very practical person, so there are some practical suggestions in this slide deck, I want to talk a little bit about our options around sources of governance for our cloud. We're probably all really familiar with the cloud adoption frameworks. Microsoft has one, Google has one, AWS has them. But I think the clue is in the name here. They're very focused on getting us into cloud and not so focused on managing cloud costs and managing cloud sprawl in a BAU world once we're up and running. And I love this diagram by Google because I think it absolutely encapsulates the challenges we face if we're relying on our cloud adoption frameworks. So this little image here is from the Google Cloud Adoption Framework white paper, and it cheerfully says, if you want early value from the cloud, then do all the stuff that's in color and just do the stuff that is in white later. And I think that's an absolute recipe for cloud sprawl, because all the stuff in the colored is all the fun stuff. It's the architecture stuff. It's the continuous integration and development, and it's leaving behind really important stuff for BAU, for our BAU world, like cost control, incident management. They're not worried about incident management, for goodness sake. Resource management, networking. They're just, you've got to go, if you follow this, you've then got to go and back fix a load of governance. So, which is not impossible either. But I think it's great. It really illustrates the problem with the cloud adoption frameworks. Now, there's another framework, which maybe some of you will be familiar with, which is called FinOps, and it's very focused on managing cloud costs. And I have to say, it's great. There's so many lessons that we can learn from FinOps, because what it is doing is it is adapting financial management to the same framework, to the Agile and DevOps framework that so many organizations are dipping their toe into, if not having, fully evolved themselves into DevOps yet. So FinOps has huge numbers of lessons for us. It aligns very well with the ethos of people who are working in cloud, and it aligns very well with the agility that cloud gives us. But there is a but. And I think, again, it's in the wording. Some wording can be so revealing sometimes. And that but is that FinOps is very, very cloud focused. And of course, most of us are working in a hybrid world. So if we see, so this is a quote from the State of FinOps report in 2021. And it says in total, 39% of respondent organizations had a public cloud first principle, but were still hybrid. And I think that still is lovely, because the reality is that for most organizations, even if their final destination is purely a cloud environment and cloud technology, they're going to be hybrid for a long time. And even if that's 5 or 10 years, you've still got to get a grip on your cloud sprawl and your cloud costs. So absolutely take a look at FinOps, learn the lessons from FinOps, but I think we need to be taking a broader view of how we manage our technology and being a lot more holistic about it. Because cloud isn't unique, it's different, it's new, but it's still another asset. We still need to govern it, we still need to manage it. So the other framework that is one that I think is worth looking at is the International Standard for IT Asset Management, ISO 19770-1. Now, a management system is actually the way we pull together people, process, partners, tools, but particularly process, to produce outcomes, and how we govern that interaction between all of our different elements of our technology organizations. So it's aligned to work very well with other management systems, and the ones that you'll probably be familiar with is 27001 information security, 9001 which is quality, 20001 which is service management. So if your organization is aligning to those frameworks or those standards, then ISO 19770 is definitely going to work with them, and it's definitely something to think about when you're sort of working out how to govern your cloud services. I really like a principles approach to establishing governance frameworks. So I was sort of thought, all right, what are the principles that we should be applying to cloud and to our technology in a cloudy world? And these were the ones that I came up with. So it'll be interesting to hear whether anybody else, when we get to the comments, has other principles or would sort of like to, provide feedback or some thoughts on these ones. So my view is, and this is absolutely critical, and this is where FinOps is outstanding, we need to align financial accountability to business benefit. And the next one is where FinOps falls down. We need to manage our tech spend as a holistic entity. We can't just silo cloud. And I find it exquisitely ironic that Agile, DevOps, FinOps, they're so focused on breaking down our management silos, but are establishing cloud silos. They're just creating another silo, which, is exquisitely ironic I love it. Anyway, we need to get our heads around the fact that we need to optimize our cloud services, and that's business as usual. It's not a one-off. It's not once and done. It's an ongoing thing that we need to build into everything we do. We need to have a formal process to bring shadow technology or grey technology into this business as usual. And I must admit, I get very frustrated when people talk about grey and shadow IT as if it's a bad thing, because actually that's the pointy edge of innovation. That's people experimenting, people thinking, oh, I wonder if this is going to be a good thing. Let's give it a go. And you know what? If it's a good thing, it'll grow. And we absolutely have to manage it, and it has to be brought into alignment with everything else we do. But sometimes it won't grow. It was just an experiment and it will drop away. So we need to have a pathway that allows people to innovate and experiment. And then if it grows, we gradually put a more firm governance and management wrap around it. But if it fades away, then we just let it fade away. So that's my little hobby horse around grey IT. And then finally, we need to build governance guide rails into every aspect, not just of cloud management, but also let's take that across all of our technology. And I think here we need to think about Amazon. We need to be more Amazon. And the reason I say that is, who has not at some point accidentally clicked the button and subscribed to Amazon Prime? I know I have done it multiple times. And if we think about how Amazon guides us to do that, to do something that we have no intention of doing, they're guide rails. Now, I'm not saying that we do it in the same way that Amazon does, because it's really frustrating when it happens. But actually, we need to take those Amazon lessons about how they're guiding us to make decisions and take action that we would not necessarily take if we were under our own steam, and put in place these things that help people make decisions and make choices that are right for the business as a whole. So I think, and that's something, again, that is a lesson that we absolutely can take from DevOps, Agile, and start bringing that into our broader organization, our broader technology organizations. So cloud, like any asset, has a life cycle. And we need to think about how we manage cloud across each of those areas of the life cycle. Now, for me, the cloud life cycle doesn't start with deployment. It starts with the contract. Because if you don't get the contract right, you're going to be wasting money, and you're going to find that you lose many of the benefits of cloud. The next thing is, of course, we need to design and build our solutions. And then we need to operate them and manage them. And then we need to, and this is the really hard bit, we need to decommission and retire them. So we'll walk through those over the rest of the presentation. But first of all, even before we think about the life cycle, we need to keep that principle in mind, that we need to match value with cost and align those two accountabilities. And traditionally, IT has been forced to make some really hard decisions, which actually are business decisions. But because IT struggles to open up that black box and explain its costs and explain what the total cost of ownership is, so that the business can understand the return on investment and then make decisions, we've been put in some really difficult places over the years. But now, if we unpack that black box, what we can do is we can say to the people who receive the value, are you getting value for money? If not, let's do something about that. So the business will then be able to make decisions about what to keep, how to use it, can they reduce service levels, But they can't do that unless we provide the enabling information. And I think that's a really critical thing around governance, is we need to be building in transparency, and we need to be building in sort of almost real-time costs, which again goes back to the lessons from FinOps. So let's think about how we align that life cycle to these principles of drawing that line between costs and benefits. So first of all, we need to negotiate the contract to ensure that when we've got these long deployment periods, we're not wasting money. We need to also make sure that we're right-sizing and really clear about what reserved instances we want to take. Reserved instances are really interesting because, of course, if you don't use them, you lose them. They allow you to leverage economies of scale, and also they can be a way of converting your initial startup costs to CapEx. So they can be really valuable, but at the same time, they're a bit of a double-edged sword. If you don't grow as much as you thought you would grow, then you can potentially waste some money. We need to make sure that our contract allows us to adapt to new business growth and achieve economies of scale at the same time. And we need to make sure that when business is bad and our cloud services is downsizing, that actually we're saving money. And if that is not in the contract, you can downsize for all you want, but you won't save any money because you'll still be paying your old costs. So that's really critical. If you don't get that right at the beginning, then a lot of the rest of what I suggest we do is going to be wasted because you won't be saving money. We need to make sure that we design and build cost efficiently. So I would strongly recommend that we have a standard catalogue of cloud builds, and that you inform the people who are building those cloud builds and the business who are using them what the costs are, so that they can make an informed decision about which is the appropriate build to use for whatever they are doing. And this is a really good example of a guide rail. Then if none of the builds are appropriate, then there's a process by which they can get a build that is non-standard. But if you present them with a catalogue, you attach some pound signs to it, then you're sending some very strong signals about where you would like those decisions, what decisions you would like to be made. Tags are really important. They're administrative, which means people hate them, but they are so critical to ensuring that you can make that alignment between cost and value. So make sure that you build out a tagging framework that allows you to understand who owns the budget for this machine, who's owning and managing the machine, who is benefiting from it, and then make sure that if you find that you lose your tags, backfix. Donna, have I finished? You must also make sure that your budget owners approve provisioning requests and changes. And so you need to, this is a really challenging one, because in many organisations, budgets sit within towers, and that is really quite far removed from the business. So in fact, you may need to rejig your entire financial approach and shift budgets much closer to engineering teams in the business in order to draw that accountability and alignment between costs and benefits. And finally, don't forget the cost of licensing. There are many ways that you can leverage your existing licenses in the cloud. It takes a bit of admin, but it is something that is worth taking a look at. Finally, we need to there's one more. We need to recognise that optimisation is a BAU activity. And here are a few ideas around optimisation that you can usefully consider. For me, a really interesting one is thinking about the storage. We often put end dates on our compute, but we forget to put the same end date on the appropriate storage, on the equivalent storage. So I've got a friend who says he does cloud optimization for a living, and he says, that's the first thing he does. It's his quick win, is identify unattached storage where the VMs or the containers have been switched off, and he can just switch the storage off, and there's an immediate saving. So finally, we need to decommission and we need to retire. And the only way to make real savings is to switch stuff off. But historically, that's been really hard. And again, it comes back to the way our data centers were structured. In a data center world, it was more expensive to make the difficult decision about what to get rid of than it was to actually switch stuff off, because the incremental cost of keeping it running was so low. The cloud turns that on its head. The incremental cost of keeping something running just adds up and it adds up and it adds up. So we need to start flexing our muscles around decommissioning and retiring services. But again, we have to push that back to the business. We have to give them the information they need to enable them to make these difficult decisions. So that is it from me. I hope that was interesting and thought-provoking. And if you haven't checked out FinOps, please do so. I think it's a really powerful framework, given the fact that it is also quite siloed. And I look forward to speaking to you, in inverted commas, when we reach the end of this morning's presentations. So thanks very much.
Kylie, thank you very much. I should just point out I'm not a young man anymore. When a presenter says something like, "Donna, am I finished?" it doesn't do my heart any good. It really doesn't. And there's tea all over the desk. What can I do? Some very interesting and useful information in that. And if you have any questions you would like to put to Kylie, use the question box down at the bottom of your screen. We will get a chance to put questions to all our first three speakers at the end of their presentations. But thank you very much for that. Chris Patten is our next speaker. He's Enterprise Lead for Cloud and DevOps for Centrica. This is good advice, because Chris wants to tell you how to have it all. Chris.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks again to Digit for letting me speak. This should fit quite nicely on the back of Kylie's talk, which resonated quite a lot. So this is about how to have our cake and to eat it, how to have it all. So industrialization, innovation, growth, control. So Kylie spoke quite a lot about those things. I'm going to continue that. A little bit about me. So I've been working at Centrica for about 8 years. Centrica is about 8 years into its cloud journey, and I get involved. I was an early adopter of cloud in the organization, and now I get involved with helping people transition into the cloud and really mediate between different groups who have different perspectives around the control and life cycle things that Kylie was speaking about, and people are wanting to maybe do more of the business innovation. So that's really what gives me this perspective to share to everybody, really from an organization that's been through their adoption. So this is very much a post-adoption view. This is a few years in, what's likely to happen, and it's particularly angled at larger organizations as well. So some of the things I'm going to be talking about resonate hopefully with people who have to deal with scale and complexity. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is this clock metaphor, which is what I would really characterize as these 4 eras of computing that I think we've moved through. So the first era, I would, and apologies if the slides are slightly hard to read. So the first era, I think, was maybe the simple era of computing with, punch cards and tape machines. And it was something that we could kind of professionals could kind of get their heads around. Then things got pretty complex, and we had the internet, we had client server, we had, the data center, all these sorts of things. And what I believe we've moved into with cloud is what I would describe as the simulated era. Because as people probably know, cloud isn't real, it's a simulation. There are drone computers, as are shown in these racks here, but what we're really interfacing with and using as cloud services is essentially software. So it's a little bit like a simulation. It's essentially a video game. So the next era we're moving into quite rapidly is what I call the cybernetic era, and this is really a blend of people, process, technology that are really interacting at this alarming pace. So this poses us a bit of a challenge, particularly for larger enterprises, because we've moved from changes maybe in epochs to changes just accelerating, then going exponential. Whoops, that went backwards. Not quite sure what. Okay, this slide just slide gremlins. For some reason the slide build isn't working properly, so I'm going to abandon it and I'll just talk through what I was trying to say. What I'm trying to say here then is that yeah, gremlins. What I'm trying to say then is the problem we have as IT organizations is that the mindset we need to be in the complex era, the values and the principles we use are very different to if we're in the simulated or cybernetic era. For example, in the complex era, we need specialists. You know, we need somebody to look after Cisco switches or EMC storage arrays and things like that. In the simulated era, it's all with APIs, it's all cloud, it's all software engineering. So we've moved out of the era of needing infrastructure specialists to an era where we need software generalists. And that is quite challenging because your average IT department is very much have a mindset that they've been schooled in the complex era. So what we can end up with, if we're not careful, is actually stoking a culture war within our organizations, particularly larger organizations, where we've got these different principles and values that we actually use to make sense of our world. So on to the next slide. Now, I would argue that most organizations are made up of edges and centers. And actually, Kylie spoke a lot about governance, about cost control, about decommissioning and life cycle. That's often something that from my experience, is often done at the center, or that's really where a lot of this stuff is maybe starts its life. The edge is maybe where you get the innovation, development of new products and services, that sort of thing. And what I would argue is there's actually, you know, to just borrow a metaphor from political science, there's an Overton window which really exists between the two parties about what is considered normal or acceptable or radical or even unthinkable, and it differs. So the edge, I would say, is more aligned to the Agile Manifesto's left. You know, it's people over process, it's kind of working systems, it's that sort of thing, fail fast, you know, Agile DevOps, building things. Whereas obviously the center is more about the control, the compliance, the governance, lights on, that sort of thing, maybe even a little bit of risk aversion. So what that means is their Overton windows of what is considered normal or radical is actually aligned differently, which means the average of the organization is like can end up a few years into a cloud journey where it's not quite right for anybody. Really what we need to do then as professionals is try and find solutions to allow these groups to work together more effectively. So the sort of common problems that the common problems, challenges that then we face are some of the following. So I've got 4 here that people may find familiar, particularly if you work in a larger company. The first one is that we've got horizontal central services often meeting vertical product teams, and that's something that we see quite a lot, where their ways of working are just fundamentally different, because often these central services teams have to deal with extreme scale, particularly in larger organizations, whereas the agile product teams are more decentralized. They're trying to look at things from a localized point of view and say, why can't we get this done in a certain way? And there's friction between them. This can then give rise to what I would describe as an empathy wall. So what happens is, because of the potential values and differences between people who are actually doing product-based work rather than the enterprise control-based work, because we have differences and there's potential for value judgments, we end up with incompatible working practices. And that means that can lead to inefficiencies and poor outcomes, which then, you know, creates this self-perpetuating cycle, which can end up with distrust if we're not careful. And because of the empathy that reduces between the teams, that then it compounds the problem, because we can't always talk to each other properly. So another challenge we can get with is with identity politics and role confusion. So am I here to am I a policeman, or am I your supplier? Am I telling you what you can and can't do, or am I here to build solutions for you? Often we get groups in the cloud that are maybe trying to do a bit of both, and that can be quite challenging for people. And then last of all, we can end up with skill shortages, particularly around automation and tooling, because as Kylie maybe alluded to, some of the things that we get from the cloud providers don't provide all of the things we need to actually make our cloud journeys successful in an enterprise way. So these gaps need to be built by somebody, and often there's a skills gap in terms of the amount of automation and building that's required. So we end up with some anti-patterns around growth and around really trying to establish new ways of working. So just on to the next one. So the way we resolve this is really to turn that conflict into creative attention. And this is Simon Wardley, the Thought Lord, and Simon's slides probably from about this deck from probably about 2014. He talks about the pioneers, settlers and town planners model, and really that all organizations need pioneers that are good people, settlers that are good people, town planners that are good people, but to some extent the pioneers that deal with the innovation of and the growth, and the town planners that deal with the governance and the control, they speak different languages, they have a different value system. So Simon correctly identified that you need groups in the middle, the settlers, and one of the challenges is then that we end up with missing settlers, as Simon referred to them as, because obviously to be a settler you've got to mediate between the two groups. That's a harder skill and more scarce in the market. So all organizations, when they're trying to have it all, will have this challenge of that missing settler community. And that's really key to the approach that I'm going to outline to you. So Kylie talked about trade-off triangles. So this is my take on a type of a triangle metaphor. And what I've done is I've borrowed this. I call this the GIC pyramid, growth, industrialization and control pyramid. And I borrowed the metaphor really from cybersecurity, where we've got red teams and blue teams. Red teams, do the ethical hacking. They try and find flaws. Blue teams try and fix them. And I think that metaphor is then the red teams in the GIC pyramid. This one are the ones that the internal customer groups that are building things, innovating, creating risk essentially. The control are trying to bear down on that risk. And then this yellow notion is the idea of industrialization. So the way this model works then is the need for control is driven by what's happening in that red growth area, but then that's feeding back into an operating platform builder in yellow that's then industrializing control solutions. So we end up with this have-it-all, or these, control as a service or growth as a service type of metaphor that's in the middle. So that is how this model works. And the type of teams that might do this building and industrialization are things like site reliability engineering teams, platform teams, some of the vendor products that work in this particular space. So just to expand on that a little bit further, a decentralized model then is needed, I believe, to allow us to make best use of the cloud, but that needs to be a decentralized control framework. So the idea of having a centralized control framework and then launch it onto a centralized cloud, that's where the friction is often created. A decentralized control model and control framework maybe looks something like this. So the idea would be that we've got these core services and these policies and standards that are held at the center, but then we've got this decentralized operating framework that I call the decenter, that allows product teams at the edge to actually innovate, but within the constraints set by the central teams. And I see, site reliability engineering teams in larger companies and platform teams as central to that. And they live within a cultural context that allows those groups to collaborate together almost in this innovation and industrialization cycle. And obviously the product teams are the people that engage with the external customers. So in order to do that, the old center of our organization either need to reform to actually create this decentralized operating framework, or they need to collaborate with groups like SRE teams and platform teams, so they can get their role, their needs catered for also. And I just put the figure 125. The cultural context is not to be underestimated. Living the paradox of giving people independence but still getting them to be collaborative and transparent is a sophisticated play. It the first iteration of the famous Netflix culture deck was 125 slides. So the cultural aspect of doing this in large organizations is no mean feat. It takes a lot of effort, but it will reap rewards, certainly. So this is a little bit of a playbook of how we might do that, and I've highlighted a few things. Now I noticed in the Google slide that Kylie put up, she was talking about people, process and technology, and I've broken these things down in this way as well. So that decenter, that new decenter is something that is not just one thing. It's a range of different practices across people, process and technology. For example, automated governance using guardrails is a very important technology that we can use. In Azure, you have Azure policy. In AWS, you have AWS organizations, AWS config. The idea that the center will define the policy, but then we will use maybe a rule-based mechanism. So rather than having to do that governance manually, we're actually automating that governance using these guardrails in the cloud. So that's a good example. Multidisciplinary teams made up of people that are in those innovation spaces at the edge and the governance spaces at the center, working together to solve particular problems is something we found has been very valuable. And even things like DevOps, DevSecOps, where we're trying to automate solutions and we're trying to build control, particularly with DevSecOps, into the actual tool chain. So it's something that rather than it's basically DevOps becomes just a metaphor for the industrialization of both functionality and control, and obviously iterating that in shorter increments. We've even got the idea of communities of practices and guilds. So this is something that I get involved in a lot, where we're actually trying to work together as communities to solve problems. So we're actually able to come up with new ways of working to actually get that balance between the obviously the growth and the control. So some examples. This is our guild network manifesto, but we've been doing guilds at Centrica for about 3 years, and this is what we found is that within the guilds we're bringing these different communities together to explore, to do group sense making, to actually explore where those middle ground solutions are that allow everybody to get what they want. And it's something that works incredibly well. It's predicated on people just really collaborating at the grassroots level. So just quickly, this is another operating model that we're working on, that we've implemented, which is actually defining 3 classes of autonomy and control for different classes of customer. So different internal customers will want not a lot of control, and so not a lot of freedom, rather, because of where they are in their journey. Other groups have a bit more freedom and control. They have a larger cage. So this is really an attempt to actually quantify those different risk environments to allow us to actually make sense of the various trade-offs that we need to make. This is another one around delegation of authority, which I think is a huge technique, where we can delegate authority to certain teams at the edge within the context of a contract. And this is just a RACI matrix and a use case diagram from a contract that we wrote around delegation of authority for role-based access control. But the idea is this doesn't just happen. We actually have to invest in creating these new ways of working, get everybody happy with them, to then get that right balance between control and innovation. This is just a Microsoft slide around Microsoft's policy engine, Azure policy, which we use those sorts of techniques quite a lot. So really, in conclusion, what we're saying is to have your cake and eat it, to have the growth and innovation that we need, plus the control and the governance, requires us to industrialize that solution using what I would call a decenter. But it has to be in the context of a great culture, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that needs to be invested in and it emerges over time. And mistakes need to be made along the way. It's a learning environment. So if you haven't done this already in your large organization, I would really encourage people to start that conversation around industrialization. Make sure that you're not just trying to solve the problem, a two-body problem with the two-body solution. Make it a three-body solution. Have industrialization an incredibly important part of your cloud journey. And then I would argue that you will be able to have your cake and eat it too. Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much for that. Again, if you have any questions for Chris, please use the question box at the bottom of your screen. You can type them in there and I will relay them once we actually get a chance to ask some questions after our next speaker, who is Vicky Glynn, Head of Strategic Growth, Cloudsoft. Great title of a talk, this. Take it from the top, maestro. I can't say any better than that.
So thanks, Mark. And Chris and Kylie, lots of things that really resonate in your talks. And thanks to Digit as well for the opportunity to speak this morning. So when thinking about how to bring a talk to a conference on cloud, especially in these days of online fatigue, my immediate go-to was that icon of technological expertise and motivation. Okay, more motivation. Gillian Michaels. For those of you not familiar with Gillian's canon of work, she's an American personal trainer, most famous for being kind of the hard-ass trainer on the Biggest Loser TV program. She's sort of the fitness version of Sarah Connor in Terminator, and you've probably seen her shout at people to, I don't know, feel the burn or something like that. And she makes about $14 million a year by getting on stage and saying stuff like this. At its core, health is simple. Eat the right amount of food for your body, don't ingest chemicals or fake food, and move more. And she makes it seem so easy and accomplishable and pumps audiences up to make them believe you can get ripped in 30 days just by downloading an app or by doing her 15-minute shred. And I thought I could come on and do that. I can make a lovely statement today like, at its core, cloud is simple. Choose the right platforms to run your workloads on, right-size them, employ good config tools, monitor them well, and I'd take you through my foolproof, easy plan about which cloud and which configuration and monitoring tools. And I'd probably chuck in some right-sizing and mutability and not assuming a particular cloud is right for everything. And I'd pump you all up, ready to go on cloud. And in taking that sweeping approach, with a lot of energy and maybe some sit-ups and shoutiness, many of the things I could say or would say would have truth in them. But I struggle to do it because in the same way that I can take a look at the sweeping statement that the preppy wit skinny ones makes and start to unpick it, because while it looks simple, we all know that health is not that simple. Even what she says here has a lot of nuance. There's not a single definition of health. Health to be an athlete or health to live an average life. And even in the solutions she asserts, there's a lot of implicit knowledge and capability and education about food and health and your body, which is one of the most complicated organisms on earth. And statements like Gillian ignore all of the complexity that goes into health. Instead, they sort of put the responsibility directly on the consumer. A sort of, well, hey, stupid, it's simple. I've told you how to be healthy and I've given you the tools to be healthy. So if you aren't, well, it must be your fault. Which can't be true, right? Because we're not that stupid. And if it was that simple, obesity rates in developed, educated countries like ours wouldn't be rising. And Gillian wouldn't be coining in that sweet $14 million a year. And it's the same with cloud. You can't just add more to already complex environments. And cloud is more. It can be a lot more. If you look at the product development pace of the organizations who provide cloud services, you can see hundreds of solutions developed over the course of the year. And if you add the cloud ecosystem into that, that moves into the thousands and tens of thousands of services. And many people, as my speakers today have done, talk about the cultural impact of cloud, new ways of working, new approaches, new things to learn. So we can't just blindly hope that adding more solves our problems. That's sort of a toxic technical optimism about cloud, akin to me assuming that every year that if I just buy that latest fitness product in January, I'll be super buffed by March. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be optimistic about cloud. That would be as silly as saying just don't exercise. Cloud computing and the rapid development of service and capabilities from everyone from the hyperscale cloud providers and the amazing ecosystem of providers, many of whom you'll see today, is genuinely underpinning true innovation, true agility, true financial advantages across in the technologies we all use in our businesses today. I'm passionate about working in cloud. I believe it helps IT operations teams bring true commercial value to their organizations. And of course, we can talk about horror stories. And there are plenty, but there are actually more positive stories about cloud, but they don't make the news. I live and breathe positive stories every day. My organization works with customers in large multinationals, finance, tech companies, aerospace, and a wide range of other sectors who genuinely believe from cloud services. So there's lots to be optimistic about. And it's not just commercial gain. Cloud can genuinely do real good. My company is working with people who are innovating and helping to fight COVID. And I know as I look around the other organizations that are here today, there are hundreds of other good stories like that. And I'm not about to say that we shouldn't be negative about cloud because it fails. All technology fails. And if Bill Gates and Werner Vogels and countless others cleverer than I say this, and if we can actually calculate that the Fortune 1000 companies pay between 1.25 and 2.5 billion in unplanned application downtime costs per year, and if we can all sit and gossip about Fastly and what happened there, I know you know all technology fails. It's just that you can, by suggesting you can take on more and more cloud without thinking about complexity in your environment, is not healthy. The question might actually even be, does the conversation start with cloud? And I don't think it does. Our conversations about cloud should start from the top with business value. And I'd argue that we really need to consider the application in that. So why the application? Well, that's because where often business value is fleshed to our customers, to our citizens, and to our users. It's the primary way we package our business capabilities up and deliver these digitally. And what's important to recognize about applications is that the landscape of these packaged services has absolutely exploded. And while I used some lovely Gartner stats to represent this at the beginning of my slide, they've stopped publishing them. I suspect they've stopped counting because it's frankly past the point that we can now measure. In fact, if I consider a global bank that we work with on a centralized application resilience project, they're looking alone in their pilot project at resilience for 100 applications. And in phase 2, that's 1,000 applications for that one bank. So in a way, the application is at the heart of what digital transformation means. This explosion of packaged business capabilities consumed digitally. And that explosion of application includes the explosion of all the things that underpin our applications today, whether that's the hybrid IT that sits under them, that mix of traditional on-premises solutions, your VMwares, your IBMs, your bare metal servers that are sit in our company data centers, in our offices, in cupboards, under our desks, in one location or many. It might be our cloud services platforms and the services delivered from AWS or Google or the OpenStack tools that we use. It may be platform as a service solutions like Cloud Foundry or OpenShift or Kubernetes. And it's all our DevOps tooling to configure our software, our Ansibles, our Chefs, our Puppets, our Salts. It's our blueprinting and infrastructure as code, our Terraforms, those CloudFormation tools, or those Azure ARM tools. And it's containers and container blueprints, your Dockers, your Kubernetes with code in different languages and different repositories. The bank I talked about, they have 50 repositories for code. And it also is our lifecycle management tools. Kylie mentioned the need to make sure you're managing the lifecycle, of your solutions. And those are our enterprise service management tools, our ServiceNow, our Avantis, our Axios systems, those monitoring and logging and AI tools that have sprung up like Datadog or Splunk or Logstash or New Relic or Dynatrace, as well as all of those tools for managing pipeline and artifacts. So they've all exploded exponentially. And as Chris mentioned, there's often different directions of travel between those focused on applications and IT who are focused on that explosion of architecture, including the cloud services under it. So business leaders focus on getting a product to market. We want the ability to creatively how they take that to the market. They want to contextualize it for the users and continue to refine their products for feedback and new digital demands. Applications are at the forefront of how they can do that digitally. And dare I say it, at a cloud conference, but they may not even really think about or care about cloud per se, although they want that benefit cloud-inspired tools bring. They don't want to be held back by the everything else that is around bringing product to market. They're completely invested in it. They want to move it forward, fixing problems and iterating. And that's not a bad thing. Of course, they're focused on agility and delivering those business outcomes, such as growth or reach to customers. But it can often cause conflict with the IT team who have to work across those technology stacks. Over the last 20 years, we've seen the IT team drawn more and more into the center of our organizations as organizations become more and more dependent on technology. And the IT team have been absorbing the complexity that we've talked about. And often they're looking across that landscape, across the applications, and considering things like security, compliance, resilience, availability, and visibility of the systems across everything. And let's not forget that explosion of the whole application environment and all of those new tools also explodes our vulnerability landscape, creating more possibility for failures and more entrance points to attack. At the very least, our IT teams are our best risk management resource for the digital world, but they also have this unique perspective across from this complexity. But we can often chuck cloud tools at them and general best practice, and when our applications fail, point the finger and say, well, stupid, you had the tools and we've told you how to use them, so if it fails, it must be your fault. Instead, what we need to do is to provide the IT teams the best way to provide optimum environments for applications and our packaged products that take account of the complexity. We need to enable them to be the maestros of their whole IT environment. And luckily, there are an emerging set of tools that are working towards enhancing the IT team's capability to manage right across this landscape. Gartner calls these tools digital platform conductors because they're specifically focusing on this top-down approach, how to take complexity and harmonize it to deliver business outcomes such as availability and resilience. Now, before you start feeling those Gillian Michaels vibes and think I'm getting into the one tool to rule them all territory, let me assure you, there's no single DPC that fulfills all of the criteria today. And I'm not sure there ever will be. No maestro sets out to conduct every orchestra or play every song in the world. And there's a lot of complexity to tackle. And also, not every company may need a DPC. Complexity is often a problem that comes with scale. But there are three key gaps that DPCs look to tackle. And in our hybrid IT world, it's worth looking at those gaps and understanding the challenges, the ones every company, no matter how big or small, should think about. So gap one is in visualization. Many of our IT teams are reliant on infrastructure diagrams to understand what they have and how it fits together. And these are often high level, lack the visualizations that take account of dependencies and interconnections, and lack the ability to reference compliance or what happens in DR. We need real-time visualization of the infrastructure across all the life cycles we have. We need to be able to see the orchestra of applications and their connected parts and dependencies before we can conduct it from the top. And the second gap is the ability to coordinate where on the digital platform application workloads are placed now and in the future. As the speakers before me talked about, we don't live in a world where we have one cloud and that's it. We live in a hybrid world where our solutions are on premises, in the cloud, or at the edge. Like an electrical conductor, say, our teams need ways to improve the flow of application workloads across our organizations. And the flow needs to be resilient, able to cope with small and large failures across both the hybrid IT, DevOps, and management tools that we have. And the third gap is our teams need standard, repeatable ways to ensure that new initiatives embark and disembark successfully. Okay, I'm trying to crowbar in a train conductor method there, but go with me. Taking into account those top-down business rules, those tolerances and policies and best practices we have, whether those are driven internally or by regulation. A use case might be simpler to think of here. So consider a regulation that an application has to be compliant with, to meet a standard of a particular industry or regulation. You need to be able to create an environment for that application that allows all of its component parts to be measured for compliance throughout the life cycle. So how are some of these DPC actually approaching solving these problems? Well, they're working through composition, orchestration, and conduction. So composition or composability at its simple involves giving our teams a layer of abstraction. So they have a way of composing the whole architecture from resources. And importantly, while these resources might be heterogeneous, we need to surface them in standard ways. So ideally, it's as simple as choosing that icon from a menu, with that icon representing the resource at whatever complexity level you want it to. So it could be an instance in AWS. It could be a virtual machine in a network, a server in your data center, or it could be an action that calls a whole Terraform plan from a registry or feed or from and to a monitoring solution. And DPCs are looking at orchestration, the ability to assume, to understand that, you know, the workflow that includes both your human access and your machine automation capability, to allow for automation to sense all of the composed elements, seeing when something is not right or when there's a failure, and automatically orchestrating an effect. So that effect might be auto-scaling, it might be repaving it, it might be falling over. Orchestration and the automation that underpins it is critical to handling that growth in our cloud environments. Conduction is one of the most challenging areas, as to conduct, you need to have agreed music that's recognizable to the listener. And that means surfacing our infrastructure in standard ways that's really understandable to our stakeholders. We can get very complex in the way we answer questions in infrastructure. Often when we answer a question, such as, is our application compliant? Our answer has to be something akin to, well, validation of type X was done for subsystem Y and environment Z by tool W on this date, and it passed with output here. The problem with that is you need a huge knowledge of W, X, Y, and Z by the listener or the stakeholder to understand that. We need ways to surface easily answerable questions. We need to be able to say, yeah, we're compliant to that regulation or measure. And importantly, be able to change those measures as regulations change or our business outcomes change. So if I get back to Gillian for a moment, I guess the main point is that the same way that if you focus on a healthy outcome and use all of the resources that work for you in your environment, and a Gillian Michaels 30-minute shred video is a resource that you use as part of the approach, it'll be a good thing. You're likely to be more healthy. So approaching cloud from the top by focusing on business outcomes and enabling your environment for applications by conducting all of the resources in your toolkit will lead to a healthy digital environment. So thanks for listening today. I hope I managed to give you an honest view of the complex environments we can work into and give hope that there are solutions that deal with that. And of course, while as a nod to Mark, our BBC speaker, I will of course point out that there are other DPCs available in the market. If you'd like to see what we're doing, come visit us, pop to our booth or join our next event. Thank you, everyone.
Vicky, thank you in turn. If we go rejoin now, Kylie and Chris, and we'll just run through some of the questions that have come in. And it's not too late. If you've got something in your head that you want to put to any of our first three speakers, then you can just use the box at the bottom of the screen. Kylie, taking it straight back to you, what would have been, the most common mistakes? Because I mean, it wasn't just a sudden migration. It was a let's do this yesterday migration to the cloud 15, 16 months ago. So what were the most common mistakes that companies were making?
See, I think mistake is a charged word because it was a very existential moment, wasn't it? So there was no mistakes because we had to keep things up and running. But I think what we need to do is recognize that some of the solutions identified and implemented to cope with that situation were suboptimal for the longer term. And I think one of the great things about cloud is actually we can potentially backfix a lot of issues, but at the same time, we need to actually put that work in. So I think the thing we need to do, and the mistake we will make now if we don't do it and don't put some time and resource into doing it, is doing that backfixing. Otherwise, we're really going to be stuck with long-term costs that are just drip, drip, drip out of the organisation. We won't be able to draw that direct link of accountability between value and costs to allow us to understand whether or not what we're paying for something is worth it and whether perhaps there's a better solution out there that we should be looking for that's more cost effective or whatever. So I think actually we don't think about mistakes that's happening in the past. I think the potential for a mistake is now. If we don't backfix and make sure that some of those solutions are long-term solutions, that would be a big mistake.
You're nodding, Vicky.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with that. I think it's mistakes are inevitable. Mistakes come out of innovation, and they come out of the need for agility, and they come out of competing business objectives. And to even label them mistakes, I agree with Kylie, that's not the direction we should be looking to travel. We should be looking to travel in the direction of how do we enable our teams to move through those mistakes, adjust what they're doing, and improve it continually.
Can I just point out that both of you have said in different ways, we mustn't label it mistakes, and then gone on to use the word mistakes in your explanation. You know, I understand what you're trying to get at, but I mean, what is the harm in actually just saying, look, boys, we screwed this up. You know, let's try and fix it.
Can I maybe build on that as well, Mark? So yeah, Vicky and Kylie, somebody that I listen to occasionally is Dave Snowden, who's the founder of the Cynefin framework, and which is about complexity science, and certainly cloud adoption at scale is nothing if not complex. Something that Dave talks about is safe to fail experiments, and I like that way of maybe talking about, you know, failure. If we can make it safe to fail, we can have, you know, a blast radius around what we're doing in some way that allows that growth while, you know, mitigating the maybe some of the risks.
Okay, right, fair enough. I mean, going back to what you were talking about, Vicky, again, I'm not an industry expert on this by any manner of means. Breaking it down, if what you said, why do we need it? How do we contract it? And how do we control it? Have I missed anything there?
No, I think that's a great question. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Is it feels like a little bit of a step back to go break it down into units so we can then compose it again. But actually, that's the only way that you can necessarily tackle that complexity. And I think by breaking it down, it also allows your finance teams to understand those component parts. We got very great in infrastructure, right, when we did that, to talk about things like virtual machines and CPU and RAM, and we created these building blocks that everyone collectively understood what they meant, and our finance teams understood kind of value and how to put those together. And in the same way, I think we need to do that for cloud solutions. So we need to take those composable parts and create that understanding within our teams and measure those so we can then show the value of each of these, because the value often, and probably what we wanted to improve in our infrastructure world, is how do you relate that to business value? And I think by taking the parts that relate to a business outcome, like a product or an application, will help our finance teams to see the value of the cloud infrastructures that we're putting together.
This to any of the three of you, to be honest, I mean, this is perhaps a heretical thought, but, you know, did they actually understand what it was you were talking about at the time, or did they just say they were understanding what it was?
How do you mean, who?
Well, basically, what Vicky's just said there is you got to a stage beforehand where people understood the component parts. You need to recreate those component parts. You need to recreate a language to do exactly the same thing with the cloud. I would contend the vast majority of people didn't understand what was being said before, but just because they got fed up saying, I don't understand this, were just nodding and saying, yeah, I understand it completely.
Yeah, nobody understands the modern world of computing completely, Mark. Even the smartest amongst us, if we do, we're lying. And this is part of the point. So something I forgot to mention in my deck is I did a review last night with a friend of mine, or the night before last, with a friend of mine, Tim Williams, and Tim made the point that the main challenge around this is why maybe people have different values and different beliefs, is cognitive overload. This is the big challenge of computing, and cloud offers solutions, but it also makes it worse because it's just further complexity in a certain way. So everybody in our industry is living inside the era of cognitive overload. We can't fit all the things we need to fit in our head, and some things we need to understand we don't understand. And then the question is, how can we then survive and thrive in our professions and do our job properly? And the answer has to be around humility and collaboration, because we're way past the era where we can fit it in one person's head anymore.
And I'd add to that actually the way the pace of change and the relative novelty of technology also means that we're making the rules up as we go along. So if we compare it to the accounting industry, and the way that then translates into finance, and this extraordinary complex capitalist world that we live in, there's been 400 years since the development, might even be slightly more, since the development of double entry bookkeeping, and the innovations and change in accounting and finance that have led to where we are today. It's happened over 400 years. Well, you could potentially look at what is happening with technology today, and actually that's happened in 50 to reach an extraordinary level of complexity. And so we really are making up the rules as we go along, and the rules completely change. I mean, the rules literally completely change about every 15 years.
Yeah, that's right. And therefore, what we need to do is we need to be fundamentally iterative and adaptive in the way that we deal with cloud.
A comment that you made, Vicky, was that the music has to be recognizable to the listener.
Yeah.
Again, you don't need to be able to read music or understand orchestral scores or anything of the kind to actually enjoy music. So again, how do we know who in the organization needs to know this stuff and who doesn't?
I think it's similar to how we approach every business, right? So no matter what role you're in a business, you often know when it sounds wrong or smells wrong, right? You can ask those. And I think that a lot of people in business, while they may not understand the complexity of cloud, they can spot when something doesn't feel right. And what they do is ask simple questions. Does this work? Is it resilient? Is it going to save me money? What we need to do as a cloud industry is be better at answering those simple questions, so we can speak we need to change our language to business to be able to say, yeah, it's compliant to governance standards, and be able to show that. But often we go in with the detail first. And I think what we need to do is be able to say, yeah, we need to be confident and have the tools that we can be confident that our applications are compliant. And then we need to be able to articulate that compliance simply, and then in more detail, and then in more detail. So, that idea that people don't understand all of the details, I'm not an accountant. I wouldn't necessarily understand all the elements of, my company's finances or our company's finances, but I know when it looks right and wrong. And I think there's lots of common sense approaches that we can adapt to as well.
This is a question from Andrew Ralston, Cirrus Logic International. The idea of delegation of authority seems pretty scary when centralization is supposed to drive common processes and economies of scale. Does Chris think that Centrica's journey scales down to smaller organizations?
So particularly, well, I agree delegation of authority can be scary. Then again, we know that constraining growth can be scary as well. So I think this is the dilemma we have, is if we have a centralized command and control structure, then that doesn't scale. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they've abandoned centralized command and control many years ago. And they've done that because it doesn't scale. Yes, there are risks, but the thing is, if people really want to scale in terms of growth and complexity, they have to experiment with these more modern approaches to actually controlling outcomes. Amazon have 14 leadership principles. They have 14 because, actually they want to empower individuals. They use a lot of automation, and Microsoft and Google, as well as Netflix, they use an awful lot of automation to actually constrain the amount of command and control that they need to achieve an outcome. But they don't necessarily need to sacrifice the outcome. But it does require a greater level of sophistication. I think that's the challenge, is everybody can't play this game. There are going to be winners and losers. Some people who are not able to climb up that sophistication curve can't have it all. They'll either need to trend to being a controller or an out-of-control innovator, and then they'll get hacked and things like that. So that's the challenge, to be able to have it all. The price of it, the deal we have to do with the devil, is we have to become more sophisticated. And I think that is going to, that's really the challenge. And now for us to achieve that, I believe it's about, and things like delegation of authority, it's about trust. How do we actually get people around the table? How do we negotiate outcomes so we're not, one side isn't imposing it on the other? It's something that works for everybody. And I think that's really the challenge that we need to, rise up to.
Kylie?
Yeah, I think through bitter experience, there is a sense that you can't trust people. But actually, we need to turn that on our heads, and we need to recognise, I come from a software background. There's this huge level of frustration often about technologists not caring whether or not we're compliant, just doing whatever. But fundamentally, we have to turn this sense of, oh, they've done something bad on its head and say, actually, given the information they had, given the circumstances they were in, they did what they felt was best. And this is where guide rails and guardrails come in, because they provide additional nuggets of information that will potentially change somebody's thoughts of, this is what I think is the best thing to do now. And then you give them an extra bit of information. They think, oh, okay, maybe it's not. I need to take that information into account. So this is why communication and guide rails are so critical doing this. And yes, it sounds naive. And yes, it means that we have to really invest in a different set of tools, which are often actually quite culturally alien to technologists. I was talking with a client yesterday, and they're saying, oh, nobody does what we tell them to do, and that's not going to change. I'm like, we need to communicate with them. I said, it's marketing. It's all about marketing. She said, but we're not marketing people. Well, you know what? Like I said, get more Amazon. Think Coke's been communicating the same message for 100 years, and that's because people need to hear the same message again and again and again in order for them to act on it. We need to learn those lessons ourselves as well and build that trust back up.
But there isn't a company in God's earth, Vicky, that exists to do other than to basically create value for its shareholders. I mean, that is a legal obligation on the directors of companies. That's why they exist. You want to maximize your profits, and everybody, whether they understand business or not, knows that. So how can, as someone who knows practically nothing about this, how can I trust you if you're standing in front of me saying, trust me, it's going to be fine, I am compliant? How would I know when you were lying or not?
Yeah, I think the idea of blind trust is the wrong idea. There's a great Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase. He said in one of the tech symposiums at a fireside chat is, tech is everyone's job. And he wanted business to understand why the infrastructure is to be supported and has to be supportive. And if you think about the business outcome for him, if people can't get to their banking products, if their banking products don't work and they're not available or they fail, that absolutely hits their bottom line. So it isn't just a blind trust thing. It has to be couched in the same kind of business language that we don't trust that, our buildings will be there when we wake up in the morning and our security teams will be there. We have to get that. But there's a responsibility on both parties. Our organizations have to come a little way to understanding technology and being able to ask those questions. And our technology teams need to come a little way to understanding, well, what does this mean when it comes to business outcomes? Because if you say to someone like, the head of JP Morgan, you say, oh, I'd like to invest £1 million in this cloud tool. That's a hard argument. Whereas if you actually say, I want to invest £1 million in making sure our banking systems are available for the next 10 years, that's a much easier discussion. So there's a bit of both. Our teams need to become, outside of the technology teams, more technological in the way they're thinking, and our technology teams need to think about business outcomes more.
So I would wholeheartedly agree with that, Vicky, because what you're talking about is empathy, and the challenge. What we don't want is a situation where we've got people who don't understand the tech but they're great communicators, and people who understand the technique and they're terrible communicators. Because all we end up with is the agent principal problem, which I would say is the summary of my what I think is the main problem with corporate IT. That we have the agent principal problem, and the issue is that really we don't want to perpetuate a business that doesn't like tech and technologists who aren't good at communication. We have to break that down. We have to have that interplay that Vicky you're alluding to. So the fact that Jamie Dimon is talking in that way is incredibly helpful. We need to explore each other's perspectives. We need to see things through each other's eyes to an extent, and then we can end up with like a coherent strategy and approach.
And I think something Kylie said was really resonant as well, is that we should expect to be, audited for compliance. Technology teams can't just go, oh, we don't want to be compliant. We don't want to think about that. We have to make sure that what we do is observable to everyone, visible and auditable as well. And we should seek to make it really auditable, to answer the questions that, people are going to ask us, and do that, and not do what we can often do is feel like there's knowledge in the secret technology powers that we have. So,
yeah. I actually smiled, Kylie, when you were talking about Amazon and how many of us have got umpteen versions of Prime. A cursory glance at my bank account recently revealed I had 3 versions of Amazon.
Oh my
Prime,
goodness!
And I managed to get rid of 2 of them, and I've retained the only one that Amazon thinks I don't have.
It's just great as long as you're not paying for it.
Yeah, well, I am, unfortunately. I'm still trying to sort that one out. But, cloud service providers, they're not doing the same thing. I mean, it is in Amazon's best interest for me to pay multiple times £7.99 a month. A cloud service provider's any different.
And I think this goes back to what I was saying about cloud adoption frameworks. I mean, the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework, I think, has either 7 or 9 components, of which 2 are dealing with governance and with optimizing on an ongoing BAU basis. So the frameworks to encourage us or to support us when we're governing cloud services and technology services, the ones that are in our face and the ones that we're being directed to are the ones that are about engaging, about adopting. But actually there are other so I think we need to take a step back and actually think about what other frameworks are out there to help us think about how to govern this for the long term. Cloud's not going away.
Yeah. Actually, that's one last question to all 3 of you. I mean, I said right at the beginning of this that essentially there's been almost a 40% increase in cloud uptake in the last 15 months. Do any of you see that going back the way? Why not?
So cloud is really the hyperscalers have really got the goose that laid the golden egg. They've effectively swallowed infrastructure, and now they can simulate it. And the simulated infrastructure, while it's not perfect, it's better than the real thing. So they've just cracked something. It's the new gold, and they're the only mines in town, pretty much. So we don't really have any choice. So we have to find a way of just going with it, but also understanding there are real risks, because the amount of power and control the hyperscalers have is just phenomenal.
Any thoughts on that, either Vicky or Kylie?
So for me, I think because some of the stuff is really, really good, right? So we want the tools that they're providing. We want the ability to do the things that they want. We can do things today that we couldn't do 5 years ago because of all these innovations in cloud. So actually, it's almost like saying, do you not, do we wish we hadn't invented the wheel, or do we wish we hadn't, this stuff is really cool. And for me, above anything else, that's what drives it. It drives our innovation, and we want those tools. So I actually think, and, I agree, I don't think Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or any of these companies, they're not charities. They're going to want to make money, but they do so by delivering brilliant products to consumers like us. So I think that's what drives the growth more than anything. I want more. I want to be able to get more, content. I want to be able to do social media. And in our businesses, we want to do things quicker, faster, and better. And I think these organizations give us tools that allow us to do that. But I also think you don't get the best car in the world with a crap driver, right? So we have to drive what we're doing in cloud. It's a tool to be used, but it's a great tool to be used.
Kylie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic has accelerated many existing social trends, not just in terms of cloud and technology, but it's absolutely done that. But even if we think about flexible working and the lessons we over virtual interactions, for instance, it's just pulled a load of things forward that were going to happen anyway and made them happen a lot more quickly. But I think what Vicky said about this stuff is great is absolutely spot on. And the clients, and it's being driven by ordinary people as well. I think that's another really important point. The clients I work with that are in with both feet in DevOps are the retail clients. They're the ones that have a direct-to-consumer business, and they absolutely need to be responding to demands from consumers. And then the business-to-business people who are supplying them with goods and services, I'm working with a marketer at the moment, they're needing to follow because it's the only way they can keep up with what's happening in the retail. So when you've got 9 billion people all demanding this sort of thing, the benefits from cloud, we're all going cloud.
Yeah, and I'm left with the overwhelming impression that I am that crap driver, as was previously identified. Vicky, Chris and Kylie, thank you all very much for your presentations this morning. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Right, we're going to take a short break now. That's the end of this first session. We're going to come back at 11 o'clock. It's a good time to visit the exhibition hall, if you wouldn't mind. Some great prizes available. Take the time to engage with the sponsors, and you can speak with some of the other delegates. From me, Mark Stephen, thank you for your attention.